This is a story about a young girl called Ling. She lives in a very old house in Hanoi with her family, and she is a happy and loving girl. At the weekend, Ling went out alone to look around some shops. She was a little bored at home, and she loved shopping. Ling walked around the ancient streets and saw a beautiful ring. It looked very old, and she thought it would be expensive. "How much?" Ling asked the shop owner. "For that old thing? Let me think. For a pretty girl like you, $10, he replied. Ling opened her purse. She had exactly $10, but she would have to go without lunch. She thought carefully for about 2 seconds before saying, "I'll have it." The shop owner put the little ring into a paper bag and handed it to Ling. During the long walk home, Ling kept opening the bag and looking at the little ring. It looked so beautiful, and she could not understand why the man had sold it so cheaply. Ling arrived home, and her family were all sleeping. She went quietly upstairs to her room and closed the door. She sat down on the floor and opened the little paper bag and looked inside. "I wonder if it will fit," she thought to herself. She lifted the little ring out of the bag and slowly placed it onto her finger. Suddenly, everything went dark, and Ling slumped down to the floor. When she opened her eyes, things looked very different. Her room was the same, but it looked brand new, like the house had just been built. Ling stood up slowly and walked over to the window and looked out. The first thing she noticed was the old tree that was in front of her window was now just a sapling. Then she looked around. It looked like she was in the countryside, hardly any houses to be seen anymore. Then Ling decided to go outside and look around. Things were so different. The air was fresher, the sky was very blue, and there were no cars or motorbikes at all. She talked briefly with an old woman who was sitting outside another small house, and found out the date. September 9th, 1948. "Wow," Ling said loudly. 70 years in the past. The old woman frowned at Ling. "Oh, forget I said that," Ling said. For the next few years, Ling watched things developing in this strange Hanoi. She met a young man called Lum, and they soon fell in love and married the following year. She never told Lum the truth about where she had come from, because he could never understand. Ling made many friends over the years. The closest friend she had was called Ming, Ho Chi Minh, in fact. Together they used to tell stories and talk for hours about all sorts of things. Together Ling and Ming resolved problems that were happening between North and South Vietnam, so the war with America never happened. Over the years, Ling became very famous in Vietnam. She invented lots of things to help Vietnamese people. She designed an underground train system for Hanoi. People loved eating her LFC chicken, and Vietnam was the first country in the world to have mobile phones called Ling phone. Ling and Lum lived long life together and had many children, and loved taking care of their grandchildren. But at the age of 89, Ling's health started to fail. She was becoming more and more ill, and she knew it was time to leave this earth. One weekend, Lien, her youngest granddaughter, came to visit. She was the youngest and most fashionable of all her granddaughters. Lien sat beside her grandmother's bed and held her hand tightly. The two talked together quietly. Then Lien saw her grandmother's little ring. "Wow, grandmother, that is a lovely ring," Lien said in a very excited voice. "Do you like it?" Ling said. "Here, if I can get it off my finger, you can have it," she said. The ring had been on Ling's finger for almost 70 years, and it was not going to come off easily. But with a few twists and pulls, it came off. Everything went dark. Ling slumped down onto the bed, and her eyes closed. She could hear Ling crying and calling out to her, "Grandmother!" But then the voice started to fade. Ling thought that it was the end and was content. Then, unexpectedly, she heard another voice. This was a voice she had not heard in a very long time. It was her father. Ling was so happy. She thought that her father was there to meet her after her death. She smiled a big smile and opened her eyes. "Daddy!" she called out. Then Ling looked around. She could not believe her eyes. She was in her bedroom. Her father was standing in the doorway, and he said, "Ling, you missed your lunch." Ling looked at her wall. The date was August 16th, 2015, and everything was back the same as before. The next day, Ling went to English class as she always used to. She wanted to tell everyone her story. She was not sure if it was a dream or if it had really happened, but she knew her English teacher would love her story. Ling sat down on the sofa and waited for her teacher to arrive. She said hello to the boy next to her. He said hello back and introduced himself as Lum. Then he said, "You're the most beautiful girl in the world." The end. I hope you enjoyed the story. See you next time.